what it is about this year, but I am so excited about summer. It's just bringing back all of these feelings of like childhood nostalgia, back when I could just read as much as I wanted. So in honor of that, I thought it would be fun to put together my own little summer reading list filled with all different types of genres and storylines to keep me engaged all summer long and maybe learn a thing or two along the way. So the first book on my list is actually one that has not been released yet. It is set for publication in June 2020. So it's coming very soon, and it is My Contrary Mary by Cynthia Hand, Jodi Meadows, and Brody Ashton. This is a historical fiction slash fantasy, and to be honest, I've never read a book in that particular genre until this year, because back in the spring, I actually read another book by these three wonderful ladies called My Lady Jane, and it is easily the best book I have read so far this year. And so the great thing about these books is there are 4 of them so far, and they're not like sequentially tied to each other, so you don't have to read them in a particular order, but they do kind of tie into the same universe. And so the amazing thing that these women have managed to achieve is they have taken real historical conflicts and replaced them with like magical conflicts, so that it just kind of makes the story a little bit more entertaining and a little bit more accessible for today's YA fantasy type of audience. And so in My Lady Jane, the story focuses on Lady Jane Grey, and if you're not up to date on your history from like Tudor England, Lady Jane Grey was famous for being Queen of England for only 9 days. And so she lived like right around the time of like Henry VIII and all his wives. Like she was a part of that time in British history. And so back during that time, there was a lot of religious conflict between the Protestants and the Catholics in England. And so in these stories, the authors have taken that real historical conflict but replaced it with a magical one. And so in My Lady Jane, there are these people called the Ethians, and they are people who can transform into animals. And so not everybody has this power, but the ones that do get their own like specific animal, like some of them can turn into a bird or a fox. And on the flip side, there are these people called the Verities, and they think that Ethian magic is wrong and they want to like eradicate it from England. And so this is the story of that kind of power struggle between those two groups as it's kind of unfolding during the reign of Lady Jane. And so in My Contrary Mary, it is still happening in that same like timeline in history, because now we're talking about Mary, Queen of Scots. I'm so excited because I cannot remember how her story ends, and I've been trying so hard not to research it, even though I really want to, but I really don't want to ruin the book for myself. And I did the same sort of thing when I was watching the first season of The Crown. I foolishly went and Googled about Princess Margaret and was just like so heartbroken at how her story ended in real life, and it just totally ruined the show for me. So I'm not going to do that this time. I'm going to wait until June and learn about Mary Queen of Scots then. But the cool thing though is that back in My Lady Jane, we actually got a little bit of a preview to Mary's character. So I won't like spoil anything if you haven't read My Lady Jane, but I'm just so excited because I've already kind of been introduced to her character a teensy little bit. And she is so like strategic, she's very decisive, she's just like very much a queen in the making. And she's also very sassy and confident, and I am just like already very invested in her character. So I am so excited to read this book. Next, we have an autobiography. When I learned about this person, I was like, how have I made it this far in my life without hearing a word about this woman? Like, that is the type of person she is. And that is Mary Seacole. And the book is The Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands. Just the title itself sounds so exciting. I cannot believe I haven't heard about this woman. I cannot believe that she is not in our history curriculum. Okay. So basically, this book is about Mary Seacole and her adventures in many lands. No. So Mary Seacole was born in Jamaica, I believe in the early 1800s. And so her dad was a Scottish military man and her mom was Creole. And so this book basically tells the story of Mrs. Seacole's life as an interracial doctor. I mean, technically at the time she wouldn't have been considered a doctor, but by all accounts in my book, this woman deserves that title more than most doctors of our time, and I'm going to explain why. Her life kind of overlaps with the period in history of the Crimean War, and I wasn't that familiar with my Crimean War history, I'll be honest, but I brushed up a little bit in preparation for this book. And basically, the Crimea is a peninsula in the Black Sea, and during this time in history, there were people kind of feuding over who got to control that land. So it was basically like Russia versus a lot of like Western powers. And so Mary Seacole was a very brilliant and dedicated doctor, and she really, really wanted to go and serve in the war and help the soldiers. And so she tried to join Florence Nightingale's, I believe, like female nurse brigade is how it's referred to, but they would not let her because she was black. But this woman is undeterred. She's like, okay, I can't go with you, I'll just go by myself. So literally she finds this like random distant relative to sponsor her on her like own independent trip to the war. And so she sets up this thing called the British Hotel, where she basically just treats and serves and protects all of these members of the military. And actually on the back of the book, it refers to her as more than just a doctor. It says she was like a mother to these wounded soldiers, and it's just an incredible story. I am so pumped about reading this book. I have already gone through the first chapter, and something that stuck out to me so much is just like her passion for medicine. So her mom is from Jamaica, and she basically practiced a lot of like island medicine. So Mary grew up basically like treating the military members stationed on the island alongside her mom. And so in the first chapter, it just talks about how like she would go and observe her mom and these kind of like different salves and tinctures that she would provide for these military people. And then she would go and test out these treatments on her dog and like other animals that she found around the island. And just reading about that like genuine from the heart love of medicine that she had as early as she can even remember, like as a very young child, it really struck a chord with me, because that is just my story. I have so been absolutely in love with medicine, like as literally as long as I have understood what the concept of a career was. That is how long I wanted to pursue it. And so to see that same love and passion from this woman, just, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to read this book. The next book on my list is a middle grade, I guess, fantasy book, because I believe there's going to be a lot of magical elements in it, and that is The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. The most stunning cover I have ever seen. Isn't, like, look at that. It is just so gorgeous. I had heard a lot of people kind of like chattering about it, but the reason I picked it up finally is because I actually heard two different people that I watch on YouTube recommend it. The first one was Abigail from Abigail's Cup of Tea, and the second one was Emma, and I'll link both of their channels below. But the thing that really stuck out to me and why I was like, okay, I'm going and getting it, is because these two people are amazing. First of all, like, they're two of my favorite people to watch on YouTube, but they have like fundamentally different tastes in books. So Abigail tends to have very like girly tastes in books, and she likes very like fluffy romantic type books, or like kind of sweet from the heart type of stories, whereas Emma has a much more like academic sense, and she's reading like Kafka on the Shore and like all these books that I would be like way too intimidated to read, both of which are valid, but they're just very different tastes in literature, and that's great. But they both recommended this book very strongly. Like, I think if I remember correctly, they both rated it 5 stars. And so I just thought, you know, if these two people who are so fundamentally different when it comes to their taste in books, if they can both love this book as much as they did, then maybe I could too. I'm trying to go into it without knowing too much, but from what I understand, it is basically set in this like magical land where there's this village and there's some kind of like a witch that lives outside the village, and the people of the village basically like offer up a child to her like every year to sort of appease her, which sounds like very scary for a kid's book. But it turns out she actually sends the children over to this other village to basically be adopted by really nice families. She actually has a very good heart, but one year she gets this little girl and somehow accidentally feeds her moonlight, which like, even in a fantasy realm, how you accidentally manage to do that, I'm not really sure. And then suddenly, as one would expect, she gets magical powers. And so it is basically a story about these two characters along with a wise swamp monster and a perfectly tiny dragon. I'm very curious to know like what the plot is going to be. Okay, our next book really needs no introduction. I'm sure you've probably already read it already, but I'm a little bit behind on my book talk recommendations, and that is Anna and the French Kiss by Stephanie Perkins. So I have heard pretty much everyone on booktok, bookstagram, booktube, all of the books, pretty much everyone has recommended this. I guess I just don't really read a ton of young adult romances. Not that I have anything against them, I just like haven't really read a whole lot of them. Then this year I read To All the Boys I've Loved Before. Well, I read the first two books. I haven't read the third one yet. But that really got me excited about the genre, and since this came so highly recommended, I thought it would be a good pick to kind of ease my way into young adult romance. Although something I don't understand is like on the back of the book it says like Anna is happy in Atlanta, she's working at a movie theater, she has a crush. So she's less than thrilled when her father decides to send her to a boarding school in Paris. Now this is just me, but I feel like if my parents suddenly up and decided to like send me to boarding school in Paris, I would be a little bit more excited. So I don't really get where her head is at. That would just be like my dream, basically. I'm expecting lots of like Parisian academia ambiance, and I am very excited to get sort of like secondhand, like living vicariously through this young woman's experiences abroad. The last book on my list is actually another nonfiction, but it is not an autobiography. It is called Honeybee Democracy by Thomas D. Seeley. I discovered this book back a few months ago when I was going through a very epic cottagecore phase of my life, and I was going through Goodreads and other people's like blog posts to find cottagecore book recommendations, because I just kind of wanted to like get into that vibe, feel the coziness. It may have been a little bit of escapism, but luckily I found this book called Honeybee Democracy. It's one of those books that like seems like a very random topic, but it is so fascinating. I've read probably the first like 1 or 2 chapters and I am already like so invested. So as you may have guessed from the title, this is a book about honeybees, but it is not just like any book about honeybees. It is specifically about the ways that honeybees kind of collectively make decisions and kind of like their collective intelligence as a hive. And I did not know any of this. Like, I am realizing that I vastly underestimated the skills and talents of honeybees as a group. Honeybees are actually very intelligent, very decisive creatures. And so this book is basically all about how they strategize together. And it's so interesting. Like, for example, when a certain honeybee hive gets too big to like fit in their current home, they actually have to go out and split the group basically, and some of them stay in the current one and some of them go out and build a new hive. As a group, they have to send scouts out to go and look at potential locations for their new hive. Then they have some way of like measuring that space to make sure that they'll all fit in it, and determining like wind resistance and like protection from the elements. And then once they've all kind of as a group decided which of those locations is best, they all kind of split up, and some of them stay behind and some of them go off and make a new home. And so that whole decision making process was just fascinating to me. Like, I had no idea that they were capable of making such like complex, high level decisions. And so the person who wrote this book is like obviously very knowledgeable about honeybees specifically, and he's actually written a lot of different books on like many different aspects of honeybees and honeybee hives, but this one just really stood out to me. It really called to the Slytherin in me, like that's what happened. But I am so excited to read this one. That is it for my summer reading list. Let me know down below what you are going to be reading this summer. I would love to get your recommendations. Also, let me know if there's any way I can be encouraging you or praying for you this week. Otherwise, I will see you next time. Bye!